And we have the 145, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just going to say it's running out.
Okay.
And I'll wait till right the time.
Sure.
About 3 more minutes.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah.
Could those of you who are saving a seat pick up the extra so the people who come in the door here can quickly get into it? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Is it feel jelly? Oh, thank you. Little jelly.
So this is Minnesota, and it seems warm outside, so we have the AC going to cool it down. And a couple visitors are saying, let's cut the AC. And so if we need to turn on the heat, if they're more than 50% want heat, we can do that too. But everybody gonna be all right? You got the AC on. All righty. Well, it is awesome to have you here. We're not officially starting. We have one more minute. And so if some stragglers come in, we don't want them to miss. But I will start by just reminding you, in your folder is the yellow sheet, and that is for evaluations. And so if you haven't filled it out yet, there will be a little break. You know, don't do it during the sessions, but during the break, make sure you fill that out, and there will be a spot at where we registered at the church where you can turn that in. And that's really important. It's pretty amazing. This conference has grown. We talk to mission leaders around the country, and they say they haven't seen anything like this. This is very unique. The Midwest Conference, this is the 10th year. And so, and the reason it, I think, has grown, and they have really gotten it down to a good science, is those evaluations. So we really appreciate that. My name is John Peterson, and I Director of Mobilization and Church Engagement stuff here at Bethany, and really with the sending agency. And so that display says, you know, your door to the unreached world. That's kind of the world that I live in. And so this is my first year serving on the planning committee of MC2, and so one of our responsibilities is to introduce our speakers. And so for many, many months, our team, maybe 10 to 12 on the planning committee, have been praying for you. We've been praying for John, and we've been praying for weather. We've been praying for speakers, and for God to bring this whole weekend together. So we've been praying for you, and we're glad that you're here. I'm going to start by just this session. I think if you saw the topic, you knew that was important. You needed to be here. And something that I know in my own personal life, and all of us know, we can learn that skill of listening so much better. And so someone like John to be able to share with us and guide us in that, I think is pretty powerful. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, a little bio intro. I'm going to pray for him and turn it over to John. John Sertalik, does that work?
Yep.
John Sertalik is, I just met him last night. So
You go back a long way.
he's the executive director of Caring for Others. What an awesome name for a ministry title. That's a member care ministry devoted to increasing the effectiveness of missionaries and reducing their attrition rate. Great goal. And along with training and debriefing work with cross-cultural workers, John has also trained lay counselors, taught pastoral care seminars in Brazil, Turkey, Tajikistan, Mali, and North Africa. But he also conducts workshops to help churches better care for their missionaries. And over the years, Caring for Others has ministered to over 950 missionaries, 62 different sending agencies, 85 different countries around the world have been impacted. So caring for others, that's important. Learning to listen is important. So would you join me as we just pray for John this time? Father, I just want to thank you for John Sertalik, your call in his life, all that you've invested in him, that story that you've woven as he learned from you and learned from the Holy Spirit. And as he brings that to us now, you just empower him and anoint him. And we want to receive from you and from your Holy Spirit, from the Word, from John now. So guide him in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
John?
Thank you, John. Well, so glad so many of you came. My goal in this session next hour is for me to do as little talking as possible, because we are going to actually do some practice listening. But before we get into that, there's just some information that I would like to go over with you. And so let's just get started. How does listening well care for the missionary soul? Any thoughts on that? Any, just off the top of your head? Have you been the recipient of someone listening well to you? Have you listened well to someone else?
I have to honestly say the quote that described your session was amazing.
Oh, well, thank you.
I loved it.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that Henry Nouwen quote in just a minute. Yeah, that's a beautiful quote.
We feel valued.
Yeah. When someone listens to us, we feel valued. We feel important. Yeah, excellent. Okay.
Well, if you're going to help a person and you don't listen, you don't even know what they need.
Yeah, yeah. That's a problem with advice sometimes. We give the right answer to the wrong problem. Because we don't know what the problem is. Because we haven't listened well enough. Yeah, excellent. Great.
As they voice what they're feeling and what they've experienced, a lot of times there's new revelation and new understanding that they get just by being able to share in an uninterrupted way.
I remember a long time ago, I was in New Jersey with a mission group in there. And it was a session where it was just lunch. And one of the missionaries was sitting across from me, and she started talking, and I was just listening. I wasn't even conscious of listening. And within a half hour, everybody cleared out of the room except the two of us. And then all of a sudden we realized, well, I guess we're done. And she said to me, I didn't realize I thought all those things I didn't feel all those things I'm feeling until I actually talked about them. And so a number of us are verbal processors. We really don't know what we're thinking and feeling until we talk about it, or we get greater clarity when we talk about it. So we could get into that a little bit more, but we're going to be moving ahead here. It honors another person to inquire about his or her life. And there's a great verse, Romans 12, verse 10. I can read it to you. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. And we do that. We can take delight in honoring someone, and we can love each other with genuine affection when we listen to them. You can't really do honoring and showing genuine affection unless we're really listening to someone. Bonhoeffer, and I'm going to show a series of quotes here. The first service one owes to others in community involves listening to them. Just as our love for God begins with listening to God's word, the beginning of love for other Christians is learning to listen to them. Very powerful. And the quote from Nouwen that was in the description. The beauty of listening is that those who are listened to start feeling accepted, start taking their words more seriously, and start discovering their own true selves. Listening is a form of spiritual hospitality by which you invite strangers to become friends, to get to know their inner selves more fully, and even to dare to be silent with you. Isn't that powerful? Any reaction to that? Any thoughts? You're all listening so well. Yes?
I love the dare to be silent with you. Like there can be power in silence, and
Yeah.
even just a community, a communal experience in silence.
Yeah.
And we're not very good at it.
No, we're not. That reminds me of a story of a pastor friend of mine was talking. And he said, his wife's name is Carol. And he said, Carol and I were traveling. We were taking a long road trip. And I was driving. I looked over to her and I said, you know, Carol, being with you is like being alone. And now when I first heard that, I thought, ooh, what a dick. But he said, she smiled and nodded her head in agreement. And because she said, we are both, and he went on to explain, we are both introverts. And to say to someone, being with you is like being alone is the highest compliment, because I like being alone. So, but we don't do silence very, very well, as you pointed out. Excellent. I saw a hand in the back. 2 hands in the back. Okay.
The spiritual hospitality, because I think so much of when we think about physical hospitality,
Yeah.
and that is something that all of us can do.
Right. You don't need fancy napkins, a beautiful tablecloth. You don't need table rings. You don't need any of that. Janet's very good at that, by the way. Keep that up. Okay. But this is something where you don't need anything tangible. Yeah. It's creating an environment. Excellent. Yes.
Sometimes if somebody actually listens to me, I realize how much noise I'm making. Because mostly we don't listen, and so we just talk, and then it takes you by surprise, and it's very noisy.
Yeah.
We're not saying anything.
Yeah. That's a great segue to something I want to read to you. I want to write to you 2 emails and a text. I got the first email at the beginning of on February 2nd, the next one on February 22nd, and a text the other day. And the reason I got the email is I just finished writing a book, and it's called, they're at the back, Them, The Richer Life Found in Caring for Others. And I was contacting some people that I thought if they wrote a good review, maybe people would buy the book. So I contacted a pastor friend of mine, and he wrote a review, and then he wrote a follow-up email. And here's what he said. He said that one short anecdote as I was reading your manuscript. A text came in from, and this is a pastor, a text came in from a troubled man and a broken man who has lost his wife to divorce and has lost overall access to his 2 children. He also suffers from OCD, attention deficit disorder, and mood swings that can be disarming at times, especially when his anger is showing. Everything in me wishes I somehow could fix him, give him just the right verse that would turn on the light of hope in him and more. When his text came in, I was in the middle of one of your page-turning chapters. I like that when he said that. He was turning, and I got to go to sleep because this thing was important. And I felt annoyed that his cry for help was interrupting my fascination of this book on caring for others. Oh, I so identify with that. The last thing I wanted to do at that moment was to care for others, at least this person. The volume of his text was like Niagara Falls on steroids. I prayed for what I could not control. It replaced my desire to fix. I replaced this desire to fix this man with one more verse and just listen, reflecting on what he was crying out for, and realized he was not looking for answers, but for a listening ear and a heart, like Bonhoeffer talked about. In some of my texts, I simply validated him as a person and God's understanding and care for him, and occasionally gave in to my urge to share a verse. After a long chain of text, I felt my prayer was answered when I had no idea of whether anything was getting through. He simply said, quote, "This conversation has made my day." I had nothing I could point to that might help him draw that conclusion, but then I didn't need to be able to point to any turning point. The Lord had used our exchange, and listening meant more than any talking. His text ended, and I continued reading your captivating book, and caring for others became more than a topic. That was so encouraging to me. So that's Mike, my friend Mike. It's from a missionary. This is on February 22nd. She's in Cyprus now, ministering to Cypriots and Turkey. Workers, not workers, but Muslims in Turkey. Oh, I was meeting with an Iranian lady I have met for, I was meeting with an Iranian lady I've met with for years. I have always been a little disappointed that she was more aware of her needs than God's great ability to meet them. How's that for honesty? My frustration usually steered me to talk incessantly and superficially. I felt embarrassed for her over her bad decisions and at a loss as to how to help make better ones. However, after reading just the first few chapters and writing your endorsement, I was determined to be a better friend. I prayed out loud all the way to the appointment. When I arrived, the conversation again began to be superficial, empty. I began to despair, and then I told her, and she mentions her name, I've just read a book that a very dear friend wrote. I've always enjoyed time with this person, and yet, as I read the book, I realized I was not a very good friend to him at all because I knew so little of his story, my story. I do not want to waste another minute with you making the same mistake. I'm determined today not to talk, but to listen to how you really are. So proceed. The next few hours slid by as my friend opened up to me like a rose in summer. Then one more thing on this text that I got. See if I can find it real quick here. Bear with me. Well, I guess I wasn't meant to read that one. I think I erased it by accident. So, anyway, all of that to say that listening can be something very, very powerful. Another quote, it's more fun to talk than to listen. Talking is like drinking a great Cabernet. Listening is like doing squats. I love that quote. Those two emails that I read, did you notice anything in common about them? There's a thread that I know. I just thought about this morning when preparing for this. Yeah.
It was not natural for them to listen.
Yeah. That's one thing. Effort. Yeah, it took effort, right? Anything else?
Irritation.
Pardon me?
Irritation.
Yeah, I'm irritated for what, because these people are requiring something of me. And I'm not liking how they're dealing with all the wonderful truths that I have to pour into their life. It's not working. And so it couldn't be my problem, it's obviously them. Yeah, great. Anything else? Well, the one thing I know, and those are all very true, that what you fellows mentioned, the one thing I know is that listening, there's not a lot in there about how the listening benefited the one being listened to, but a great deal of benefit to the one listening. And so listening obviously benefits the person that's being listened to, but it also benefits us, brings out the best in us when we are listening well. Okay. Another quote by Bonhoeffer. Many people are looking for an ear that will listen. They do not find it among Christians because Christians are talking when they should be listening. He who no longer listens to his brother will soon no longer be listening to God either. Thoughts on that? Reaction? Most people do not listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. Listening is like reading a corporate report. Talking is like eating a cinnamon bun. Got away with words. Okay, how does good listening begin? And I suggest that it begins with a box. Now let me explain. We don't have a lot of time, but if we did, I would ask you to take out 5 scraps of paper and write down all the things that you're thinking about right now that have nothing to do with this conversation, with this seminar, with this workshop. Because I find that I do that a lot in church and in workshops. Right now I'm thinking about, are we going to make it to Chippewa Falls in time to see our friends? I'm thinking about, did I stop the newspaper delivery, and if not, our newspapers piling up at our door and burglars are seeing it and they're invading our house and walking away with our TV, and it's an old TV anyway, so maybe that wouldn't be so bad. So I'm thinking about all that stuff. You know, we're always thinking about stuff, and thinking about that stuff keeps us from focusing on what the present is. So I like to think of it as taking our needs and all the things on our to-do list, all the things that are bothering us, all our physical aches and pains, and putting them in a box like this. Anything that we're worried about, anything that, maybe even something that we're happy about, things that we have to make important decisions about. You know, I'm thinking about Janet's mom. She's in assisted living, and we have to file a report every year to get Title 19, and it's a very cumbersome process. And when we get home, I've got to work on that, and then a day later we go down to see our daughter, and so I'm thinking about all that, and that, if I think about it very long, it can weigh on me. So when I want to listen to someone, I just make a mental note of that and put it in this particular box. And I try to do that with anything that's consuming my heart, my mind, my thought life, my emotions, and just putting it in a box. And then I put a lid on the box. Yes. And then I go to my bedroom closet, and I'll open the door, and I'll put this way on the top shelf. Way on the top shelf. All my needs, all my concerns, all my desires, all my wants. And I shut the door. And then I can have the freedom and wherewithal to truly listen to someone when I'm not thinking about all my stuff. But it takes a conscious decision to do that. Now, when I'm done listening to someone, I know, or even before I start listening to someone, I know that box is there. And all that stuff, all those decisions and to-do lists, it's still there. It's not going to run away. So when I'm done listening, I know I can go back to the closet, pull the box down, look at the shelf, open the box, and just kind of rummage around there, and oh yeah, I got to deal with that, and then move on my way. Because if we were to wait until all our needs were met, all our decisions were made, all our to-do lists were done, we would never ever listen to anybody, because it just never ends. When do our needs end? Not this side of heaven, that's for sure. So good listening starts with just setting aside your stuff for a while. It doesn't mean that you deny them. It doesn't mean that you completely forget about them, but you do so for an hour or forever long that you're meeting with someone. Because it allows us to be fully present with that person. And if we're thinking about all the stuff in our box, we're not going to be fully present. I remember one time our son was a senior in high school, and he was a pretty good basketball player. And I thought he was playing his last game at home. And I noticed a lot of other fathers were recording the game. And I didn't have a camcorder at the time. Now this is in the days when camcorders were about like this big, and they weighed 800 pounds, and you got shoulder injury from using them. But a friend of mine had one, and I thought, you know, I'm going to be a good dad, and I'm going to record Michael's last basketball game. And so I got the camcorder and set up in a tripod in the bleachers. And it was the worst experience I've had in my whole life, because I was so concerned with futzing with the settings on the recorder, trying to preserve the present for the future, but I missed the present. I just missed the present. And who watches those things anyway, years down the road? And it really impacted me. I think God really spoke to me to the notion of really enjoying the present. And to enjoy the present, we have to, as much as possible, set aside the past for the moment and set aside the future for the moment, so that we can be fully engaged with someone. Okay, so it begins with a box. So how does good listening continue? It starts with asking good questions. And the time that we have, this whole subject of listening is something just fascinates me. It fascinates me because there's not a lot written about it. I haven't read a lot about listening, which tells me maybe I could write about listening, and no one can really disagree with me, because so I could become an instant expert. You know, books on communication. If you read books on communication, it's almost always about how to talk, how to negotiate, how to get your point across, how to persuade someone. Not terribly much about listening. How can we truly understand someone? Well, if we were to work on our listening skills with missionaries, and to think, you know, I'm really busy, I don't have a lot of training, I don't have a master's degree in counseling, I don't never even went to college, but I really care about missionaries, and what can I do to help them? I can't afford to go overseas to visit them. I can't. But what is one thing I could do? And there's one thing that we can all do, and that is listen to a global Christian worker when they come home, and even when they're on the field. Well, how do you do that? How do you do that well? And I want to talk for the rest of our time here. I would like us to deal with just one aspect of listening, and that is simply asking good questions. Asking good questions. So, let's get into that. At one point, in thinking about this, I came up with a list of about 30 questions that you could ask just about anybody. Because it was easy for me, and I was in business for a long time, and it was a sales position, and I had to learn to ask the right questions, because if I didn't, I would lose money. And money motivated me, and I learned so much from my mistakes. And so I've been kind of learning about listening just by all the mistakes I've made. And so I came up with this list of 20, 30 questions, but then I realized that that's way too much for anybody to remember. Just way too much. And I'm kind of a simple guy, and what can I do to really make this simpler, easier to remember? And so, anyway, I forgot this quote. I long to hear the story of your life. Anybody want to guess where I found that? Shakespeare. Yeah, well, it's from The Tempest, yeah, but do you know where? I mean, physically? Any of you been there? A couple of years ago, we went to visit some friends in England who run a member care center. And we went to Stratford-on-Avon, where Shakespeare is from. And they had this huge Shakespeare museum. And it was just fascinating. You walk in the door, and that is the very first thing you see. I long to hear the story of your life, from The Tempest. I long to hear the story of the thousands and millions of words that Shakespeare wrote. This is what the curator of the museum thought. This was his signature piece. I long to hear the story of your life. And what a great phrase, I think. Yes. I long to do that. Okay, asking questions. One question, why aren't you asking me any? We don't have time, but let me read this article to you. This is from USA Today a few years ago, and that's the title of the article from this writer. And he says, every now and then a reader will ask me to write on a certain subject. Actually, it's not very now and then, it's almost daily. Why don't you write about penguins, someone asked the other day. As cute as they are and as in as they are, I don't really have much to say about penguins. Never even met one, in fact. Nor do I have anything to say about National Pancake Day, which incidentally was just last week. Maybe you missed it, I did. Someone offered that up as a topic too. I had to confess I was a French toast kind of guy. But a reader at Oklahoma City piqued my interest last week when he wrote about a, quote, serious problem, unquote, spreading across the land. He thought that if it were highlighted here, it might be stopped. I doubt it, but let's give it a try. The problem? He dubbed it meism. Me-ism. What he and his wife have found is that they can spend great amounts of time with recent acquaintances, and those people never ask a personal question of them. Not one. Even on trips abroad, they've discovered that fellow travelers spend copious amounts of time telling all about themselves, but never ask anything in return. A one-way road in Paris. Why, he asked. Good question, and I thought it was just me. For more than 30 years, it has been my day job to ask questions. So it's natural for me to corner strangers at social gatherings and inquire about everything from their shoes to their children. Women especially can talk about both topics for hours. Without fail, I'm more interested in the shoes than the children. But I'm always perplexed that more often than not, no one seems to ask anything about me. As much as I hate the "and what do you do" lead in, I'd be grateful for even that on occasion. Until recently, I thought it was just a Washington thing. In a city filled with egos bigger than Texas, you get used to having people look over your shoulder for someone more powerful, more useful, more connected. As for inquiring about me, I'm not that foolish anymore. But now it's even happening in Oklahoma City. Not good. I've turned the one-sided chat into a game. Now when I meet a stranger at a party, I ask 1,000 questions, then wait in silence to see if any questions bounce back. Sometimes I've stood there for 5 minutes, which, believe me, is a long time for me to be silent. Usually these people just smile and look a bit perplexed, perhaps wondering why I'm no longer interested in their fascinating life. For years I've had a button on a bulletin board over my desk. It's bright yellow and has a simple message, ask a bunch of questions. I don't know where it came from. I've always assumed it was some editor's failed attempt to stir the troops. Now I think we should make 1 million copies and hand them out at parties. Maybe they bring about dialogue in Oklahoma City at least. Washington, I'm not so sure. So, why is it that we don't ask questions of each other? Yes?
We're selfish and we want to talk about ourselves.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, anything else? Any other reasons why? Besides wanting to talk about ourselves?
We don't want to sound too nosy.
We think we're going to be nosy. Okay? How often does that really happen? Hardly ever. That's been my experience anyway.
But I think we were raised by a generation that said, don't pester people.
Yeah.
At least
Yeah.
my mom and dad always
Yeah, it could be a generational thing, sure. Very good. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry.
We're not sure the right questions to ask.
Okay, yeah, we're not sure. That's a great, that's what we're going to get into. We're going to learn what the right questions to ask are. Okay, good. Yeah, I've gotten that sense. I used to think people just don't care. I used to be more of the people are just self-centered kind of thing. And as I look in the mirror, I see that there's a bit of truth to that. But I also think that there's some people that genuinely want to know about more people, but they just don't know what to ask. Any other reasons?
Sometimes I just feel filled up, and like I have no bandwidth to hear the answer.
Yeah.
You know, and there's probably selfishness in there, but sometimes I just feel like I don't have any more capacity left.
Yeah. And I think that's a legitimate reason not to be asking questions. If we're in a time of life or a situation where we just have nothing to offer, that's certainly reasonable.
If they want me to know something about them, they'll tell me.
Yeah, I don't think that's true either. But that's what we think, that's what we think.
Because I'll tell people things about myself.
Yeah, right.
Could it also be sometimes that we have sort of a script, and if we allow for questions, people are going to start asking us questions we don't really want to answer.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another reason why I think we don't ask questions is because we're afraid of what people might say. We're afraid of what the answer is. My wife Janet is sitting here in the front in the red, and sometimes when I can tell when she's not when she's upset about something, and the question I hate asking is, "What's bothering you?" And when she answers and says, "Oh, the garbage disposal isn't working right," I just go, "Oh, great, it's not me this time." So I can handle anything, I just don't want it to be about me. And so that's the reason why sometimes we might be afraid of what the person might say, because something more might be expected of us. And we may not have much more to give, or we may not want to give much more. So there's all kinds of reasons why we don't ask questions. But we want to try to correct that. We just talked about that. Sometimes the questions we ask are more important than the answers we think we know. Ruth Bailey Barton. You can tell whether a man is clever by his answers. You can tell whether a man is wise by his questions. We had a great session in this room last night with Christine Osgood. Were any of you here for that? Yeah, it was just excellent. At the very end, we talked about asking questions that spoke specifically to the care of souls. Okay, but I don't know what to ask. There are only 2 questions we need to remember. Okay? You don't even need to write this down because you remember it. The first question is a question that we ask ourselves, and it's this: what must it be like to be the other person? Based on what you know of that person, even if you know very little, even if you're just looking at somebody and you've never met them before, to ask ourselves, what must it be like to be that person? If I were that person, what would I be like? And I got a story. The Dutchman we met at Gull Lake, Michigan. This is several years ago. Jan and I was still working I was still in my business at the time, and I got home about 5 o'clock, and we live in Milwaukee, and we work among the tribal people of Milwaukee. And usually people laugh at that, but anyway, this conference was in Gull Lake, Michigan. I think it was near Kalamazoo, and we had to drive through Chicago. And driving through Chicago at rush hour on a Friday night is not much fun. So anyway, I got home, and I thought I'd packed, and we loaded up the car, and we drive through Chicago, and just bumper to bumper for a long time, and we finally get to Gull Lake, Michigan. And I realized that we had left half of our luggage at home. I got to wear the same clothes for the next 3 days, and what are people going to think? And they're going to be talking to their neighbors about us and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, we went to bed crabby, and woke up crabby. And we got up, and the first thing we had to do was go for breakfast in the dining hall. And I remember going through, it was a cafeteria style. I remember getting the tray, and we got all our food, and just thinking about this, how irritable I was. And I said, let's just go to the far reaches of the cafeteria, out in the hinterlands of the cafeteria, so that we don't infect anyone with our crabbiness. So we did that. And so Jan and I are way, she of course was gracious, she always is. But we were way off in the corner, and there were miles between us and the next person. And so we're eating our breakfast and still being crabby, and then this older man starts walking with his tray toward us. And I go, oh no. This man's gonna sit by us. So he sits down, and he starts talking, and he was asking us a couple questions and talking about the weather. And I noticed he had a European accent. And he was about, 75, something like that. And I said to him, I noticed you have an accent. Are you from Europe? And he said, yes. And I said, where are you from? And he said, oh, I was born in Holland and left there when I was 19. And I stopped for a minute. He left Holland when he was 19. He's this age. And I started going back to history. I thought, well, were you in Holland during World War II? And his eyes light up. He said, oh, yes, I was. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, what was it like living in Amsterdam? He was in Amsterdam. What was that like when the Nazis overran the city? And he started telling all these stories about what it's like to live with men walking around with rifles and pointing at you. And all. He just went on and on about these stories. And all of a sudden, I found myself just really energized and talking to this guy, and my soul came alive. And I said, he said he had moved. He told us earlier he had moved to Canada. And I said, well, why did you move? Why did you leave Holland? And he said, well, after the war, the government thought that our country was going to be overpopulated, and the country would not be able to support this increased growing population. And so they offered anyone what amounted to about $20,000, a one-time check in those days, which would be like, what, $200,000, if they would leave and never come back. Yeah, he said because they were so concerned about the population. Well, then he laughed and he said, the population's even much larger now, and they're doing just fine. So I decided, I was 19, I was young and adventurous, and so we started talking about that. And I said, well, why did you move to Canada? Why not America? Because the Americans and the Canadians had liberated Amsterdam about the same time. And he said, the Canadian soldiers were so much nicer than the American soldiers, so I decided to leave, and I moved to Canada. Well, then the breakfast was done, it was time to go to the seminar, and I just noticed, hey, I'm feeling really pretty good. Because I was thinking about what it was like to be that man, and thinking about that just evoked tons of questions. when you think about someone that age living during World War II, it was easy to think about him. And it got me out of myself. It got me out of my crabbiness and thinking about my needs. And it was, the rest of the conference went just great, even though we wore the same clothes for the next 3 days. Okay. Jesus often considered what it was like to be the other person. It's a great verse in Mark 6. He says, Jesus saw the crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. What do you think it would be like looking out at some people and using that phrase, that simile? They were like sheep without a shepherd. What connotes that to you? What imagery? What does that do for you? How does that give you a picture of people?
They're afraid and insecure.
Yeah, they're afraid and insecure, sure, as the sheep would be without a shepherd. Yeah, anything else?
They're lost.
Yeah, they're lost. They don't know what to do. Where do we go? What do we do? What's going to happen next? Yes, excellent. Anything else? Pardon me?
They're vulnerable.
Vulnerable, yes. Yeah, are we safe? Who's going to protect us? Great.
They make a lot of noise. They're like, they're loud.
Yeah, that's true. We had a pastor one time, I think every 6 weeks he talked about how stupid sheep were. And what he was really saying is, people are stupid. And it wore on us after a while. But when you think about all those things that you mentioned, doesn't that evoke a little bit of compassion? You know, as it did for Jesus. And when you start looking at life from the perspective of another and thinking about what's it like to be them, it'll naturally evoke a response. Okay, here's an example of considering what life must be like for another. Let's see if this works. video was commissioned by the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, a world-class premier healthcare institution in the world. And why do you think he did that? He commissioned this video. What was your reaction to it?
Probably dealing with people who work in that environment and get callous toward all the things
Yeah.
that they see all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a story behind everybody, isn't there? Yeah, good observation. I went through this one time, and I don't remember I think there are 26 different situations that are described. A lot of them are about not patients, but staff.
Yeah.
Staff, you know, the people that you work with every day. These patients come and go, but the people that you work with, they all have a story. If we understood them better, if we saw life better from their perspective, we might treat them differently. Well, that's a little bit about looking at life from the perspective of another. Brene Brown has this video talking about the same thing.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Your reaction to that?
Awesome.
Yeah. We do try to fix people, don't we? And we try to fix people because we're uncomfortable with their discomfort. And a lot of times we try to fix people to ease our discomfort, not so much out of compassion or concern for them. So when we're listening well to a missionary, our job isn't really to fix them. It really isn't. Our job is to create that environment that Henry Nouwen talked about that allows them to explore what is really going on deep within their soul, and to allow the Holy Spirit to correct them. Or not to correct them, and sometimes to correct them, but to comfort them and to provide clarity to whatever it is they're dealing with. So, and I love the distinction she made between empathy and sympathy. You know, sympathy is a little more distant. Empathy requires more of us. And she says at the end, it requires us to look, to draw from within us a feeling similar to the feeling of the person that we're listening to. And that can be kind of dangerous. Okay. Okay, there are 3 types of what must it be like to be the other person questions. And I want to give an example of this in terms of, we did this at our church one time in our adult Sunday school class. We were interviewing someone, we were talking to them, the whole class, and we're going to do that here too. And she told us that as part of her story, she's about 60, and she got divorced when she was about 40 and was left to raise 2 adopted children. Okay? And so when we were thinking about what's it like to be her, there are some natural curiosity questions that arose in me. Like, I'm wondering, well, why did you get divorced? What happened? But that's more to satisfy my own curiosity. It wasn't going to be terribly helpful. A lot of people in the room knew. I didn't, because we hadn't been at the church all that long. So when we think about what what life must be like for the other person, try to avoid curiosity questions. Another type of questions are questions that are about me. She told a story of how she lost 30 pounds about 10 years ago. And immediately my thought was, how did you do that? Because I wanted to lose 30 pounds. It was all about me. It wasn't anything about her. So when we're asking questions and thinking about what's it like to be the other person, try to stay away from questions where the whole purpose is to benefit you or to benefit me. The best kinds of questions are you questions, where we're asking questions to that other person where there's no intrinsic benefit to us. And the only benefit is to draw that other person out, to get clarity. Those are the best kinds of what's it like to be the other person questions. Okay? The second question, remember I said there were 2 questions, only 2 you need to remember? What's it like to be the other person? The second one, this is my favorite. The second one is simply ask a follow-up question. Just a follow-up question. We do that so rarely. People will throw out stuff and we won't follow up on it. Here's some examples of follow-up questions. What do you mean by that? Get someone to define their terms. Quick story. I was in Turkey a few years ago and staying with this missionary couple. And we were having breakfast one morning, and the wife was just visibly agitated. And she started talking to her husband about having this phone conversation with her son the night before. And she was just really beside herself. And she said, he told me that he's gone through a new religious experience in Chicago. And she said, well, I wonder what that means. I wonder, has he joined the Mormon church? Has he become a Jehovah's Witness? And she just starts speculating, going over and over in her mind, this could be terrible. Let have this new religious experience. And so I said, well, why don't you call him tonight and ask him what he means by that? And she said, okay. So she did that. Next morning, she was a completely different person. And she said, I did what you said, and I found out, and I don't remember what the answer was. And she said, but it's completely innocent. It wasn't anything like I thought. In fact, it's a really great thing. And she said, you don't need to put on that seminar and the workshops and all the stuff we had you come over here for, because this alone made it worth your trip. Well, great, I can catch him my next flight out of Anchorage. But it can be that powerful. We simply ask, what do you mean by that? Because we all have varying definitions of words, and we don't want to make assumptions. I wish we had more time. The first recorded words of Jesus were to his mother, dealing with an assumption that she had made. And they say, you know what they say about assumptions? It's the lowest form of communication, followed closely by email. And I really think that's true. Another type of follow-up question is why? Just why? A pastor, I was with a group of pastors one time, and one of the guys in the group said, he said he had done a wedding that weekend. And then he said, I'd rather do 100 funerals than one wedding. And the group just kind of moved on and started talking about the baseball team. So wait a minute, what do you mean by that? Why would you rather do 100 funerals than one wedding? And he said, well, I was a pastor in a small town in Canada where very few people went to church, but they all went to funerals. And he said, so I developed a 5-part funeral sermon series. And it goes something like this. They have a funeral, and he would start talking. He'd say, you know, when we were here 3 weeks ago and Mrs. Jones died, I talked about X, Y, and Z. And now that Mr. Schultz has passed away, I'd like to continue that. And it's like a sermon series that he has. So, you know, 5 people would die, and he evangelized the town that way. So we had more people come to Christ as a result of funerals. He said, I never had anyone come to Christ at a wedding, you know, but at funerals. And it was such a delightful story that, oh, it just gave me goosebumps even thinking about it. But it's all about asking why. That's the follow-up question. Another one is, how so? I don't want to get into that because we're running out of time, but how, you know, when someone is explaining something, just ask them, how so? And then can you give me an example of that? Okay, cautions about questions. 1, slow down. Don't ask them real fast. Don't ask them real quickly. Give people time to process it. Don't use to control. Sometimes we can misuse questions because we want to direct the conversation to something that we want to talk about rather than what the other person needs to talk about. Don't use to make a statement. Sometimes we do that. Isn't it about time to take out the garbage? Rather than saying, I think it's time to take out the garbage. Try making an observation instead, rather than asking a question. My grandson did this not too long ago with Janet. And both these boys are 14-year-old twins. They are so relationally astute. It troubles me sometimes to see how good they are with adults. But he looked at Janet one time, and instead of saying, Grandma, how come you look so depressed? Instead he said, Grandma, you look kind of down today. He made an observation. And that allowed Janet to talk about it. She may not have talked about it by asking, if he would have asked a question, but he simply made an observation. Okay, back to the Henry Nouwen quote. The beauty of listening is that those who are listened to start feeling accepted, start taking their words more seriously, and start discovering their own true selves. Listening is a form of spiritual hospitality, by which you invite strangers to become friends, to get to know themselves more fully, and even to dare to be silent before you. So we got 5 minutes or 6 minutes. I'd like to practice, and here's what we're going to do. I'd like a volunteer to come up here and sit on the magic stool here, and we're simply going to ask you questions. And here's the ground rules. Whoever volunteers, just give us maybe a minute summary of your life in 1 minute. And then the rest of us are just going to ask questions. And we're going to ask questions, what's it like to be this person? And then follow-up questions. Okay, and I'll be your listening coach. By the way...
And we're not going to tape that,
Oh, that's right. Hey, thanks for reminding me.
Okay,
Great.
so we're going to turn it off.